Real as
All right, so Nathan, I appreciate your coming in. Third time's a charm.
Happy to be back.
Got all the technology worked out.
We'll see.
Yeah.
But yeah, so love having you in. Obviously, being friends with you, you knowing Becky from the charity event. Just want to jump right in and talk about it. So
Sounds good.
So what is your role? We have you here today as our guest. Yeah, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so my name's Nathan Hartley, and I'm the associate pastor over at Hope Community in South Reno. And I'm born and raised lifelong local, and been in South Reno there at Hope for about 7 years or so.
Nice. Okay. What did you do before you were there?
So I've actually been in ministry since I was 19 years old.
Holy moly.
So most of my professional career has been in vocational ministry as a pastor. So I spent time up at Grace Church up in the Northwest for about 10 years before I was down at Hope. But
Okay.
my path to ministry started earlier than I had scripted.
Okay. So were you raised in the church, or was this something that came about like after
I was.
you got out of the
Yeah,
house?
I was.
Okay.
For both sides of my parents' sides of the family, first generation Christians at both sides of the family, so they were blazing a trail on both sides. For our family was being raised in the church.
Okay.
So it was kind of cool when I came staff up at Grace. I'd been up there for 25 years, so the lead pastor there, he did my parents' wedding. So just last week I saw a few of their staff members who were running their youth programs and things like that now, and they were old youth group kids of mine.
Oh, that's cool.
And they made a comment to me. They're like, "We make you feel old." I'm like, "I'm sure I made people feel
Yes,
old when they
you
hired
do.
me too many years ago."
Yep. Isn't that funny how that happens? It happens quick too.
It does.
Way too quick. Nice. What was the starting point of getting into what you're doing? Did you always want to do this? Was it like your calling, or there are a lot of people obviously who are religious, raised religious, not raised religious, but like to get to the point where you're doing what you're doing is a pretty huge thing. So.
Yeah. For me, I'm very grateful. I really felt a very clear calling to want to be in ministry at an early age. And like I said, it happened earlier than I expected. I expected to go away to school, start in my mid-20s, something like that, and things didn't turn out that way. But I actually felt called to ministry when I was on a mission trip that I was too young to go on when I was in 8th grade. I had a youth pastor whose wife came up to me and said, "Hey, we're taking kids down to South Central Los Angeles this summer. It's a high school thing. You're not old enough to go, but I want you to go."
So religious people break rules too.
Yep. Yep. Hey, it was the pastor's wife who broke them. She was allowed.
Knew it. Okay.
Yeah. So I really felt called to ministry after we'd spent a day working in Midnight Mission and some of the other missions down in the Skid Row area of Los Angeles with men in their recovery program and getting to hear their stories. And then we spent all afternoon at 9th Street Elementary School, which is an elementary school in the Skid Row area. No permanent buildings, all mobile, surrounded by razor wire. All the kids are homeless. Parents might work in sweatshops, maybe.
Why is it surrounded by wire? Is it?
Skid Row's used to be a 10 by 10 block area just on the edge of the downtown area where they, in theory, moved all the homeless services to try to make it easy for people to consolidate, similar to just around the corner here. They try to do in Record Street in Rio's history. But really it was the portion of the city that they just tried to funnel the homeless population to. Okay. So there's tens of thousands of homeless people on the streets in this. Now it's more about like an 8 by 8, 7 by 7 block radius.
So this was what got you in. So you're 8th grade, and this is what promoted it. So what was the trigger in that?
For me, I remember talking with Carol, who invited me on the trip, and I said, I was watching these kids who, horrific situations, if they often down there, if parents are able to make some money, if they have money coming in every month, something like that. Beginning of the month, they'll be able to stay in single room occupancy housing where there's a couple families in a room, might share a bathroom on the floor with drug dealers and prostitutes, and those kid situations. And these kids were amazingly kind. And they were fighting over us when we walked in the doors, grabbing us and saying, "He's mine, I called him for the day." And I remember talking to Carol and I said, I feel like there's been a deposit made in my life. Like I need a God who's big enough to do something about this, because this isn't the way the kids are supposed to grow up.
Yeah.
So if God doesn't know, can't do anything about it, doesn't care, I'm out of here. But I feel like there's been a deposit made in my life why I need to care about this.
So let's talk a little bit about that. So, so there was this, it sounds to me like there was kind of this theological in your mind of, okay, God has to be this thing. So in the 8th grade, Becky's pretty mature, she's pretty smart. I've talked to her about some of the things she thought about in the 8th grade. In the 8th grade, I was like, putting on bikes.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out how to. And I love this piece because I think it's such an interesting piece, kind of like borderline apologetics. So you have this moment where you're like, God's got to be big enough. And I think this is a great conversation because, you know, Becky, she is straddles the fence, agnostic atheist. You're a theologian.
Definitely not atheist, but yeah, absolutely
Okay.
agnostic. Yeah.
So, in a sense, this is a wait. Okay, so what's the turn of the wheel here? What was the answer to that question?
Yeah, for me, I really felt a very strong conviction and answer of God does care, and He's called His church to do something about it. And so, rather than have this, somebody needs to fix this, these people are the problem, why does nobody care? Realizing, oh no, I'm supposed to be one of the people that cares, and realizing that responsibility there. And that was the click for me, because I was kind of an angsty punk rock kid. Like, it doesn't take a lot to piss off an 8th grade
Right.
punk rock
Yeah.
kid.
Yeah.
But it became more than just I'm angry at what I see out here, but it became I have the responsibility for what's in here to do something about it, and to see that side of, if God is real and He's called His church to do what they're supposed to do, that's my job then, so what am I going to do about it? And just to see that connection point there, to do more than just to be pissed off about it and want to see it burn, but to do something.
So what do you think the difference is between that and just being a human wanting to help? Because, I mean, where is the connection there for you? Just seeing the fact that there are still these issues all over the world every single day, right? It's still happening, so where is that loving God?
For me, it all boils down to the person of Jesus. As I look at the person of Jesus and who Jesus is, He cares for those kids first and most. And He created this world not to be the way that it is, and in a world that was perfect, and where kids didn't have to go hungry, where kids didn't have to face abuse, where kids didn't have to be on the streets. And because He cares, I follow Him.
Yeah.
It's not about me just doing something because I think it's what should be done, but realizing He cares more than I do, so I'm going to follow after and care too.
I guess my question is, though, if He cares so much, why is it still happening?
Yep. And I think the hard answer is it's easy to see the way that things are not as they should be, and not to see the slow transformation that happens when you see those beautiful moments where change happens in a kid's life, in a family's life, in a city's life. Those stories don't always get the airtime.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, everyone loves the bad story.
Everybody loves the bad story.
That's what sells.
And you drive down the street and you see what you perceive, snippets of people's stories.
Yeah.
And for me, that was what was equally paired when I look back at that day of spending a day with men in the recovery program in the mission who were turning their life around, who had found themselves on the streets. They were the homeless people walking by this school, and their lives were changing. And I remember talking with one gentleman who just around the corner at the LA Rescue Mission. It's one of the largest missions in the country. And one guy was telling us his story of coming out of an heroin addiction. A large African-American guy with a big booming voice in this linoleum hallway, people everywhere. He just started crying and breaking down singing Amazing Grace as he's telling us his story. And I was dumbfounded. But to see that is transformation happening. That is Jesus changing an individual's story. And the family transformation that then happens to break a cycle, to see that it's a slow transformation, but I believe that God cares enough to care for that individual.
Do you think it's I mean, good and evil at play too? Like, I mean, I don't know, you know, when you see like the bad things happening and the evil, is that like the clash with good and evil? Is that like going on, or are you thinking it's like you're making this choice to combat the bad, to combat the evil?
Absolutely. I think of that juxtaposition there of when you see the way that things were not created to be, and you see the cycles that happen, you see true evil happening. And sometimes we can we can file the edge off because we see snippets of hurt, we see snippets of addiction, and we see things that we're all like, that's not the way it's supposed to be. But when you see like actual evil happening and people victimized, and you see that, to combat that is to say no, but also to say what's good. And for me, that was that conviction point of, that's long and slow and hard and messy, but that's the good stuff.
Yeah.
And it's a process, and especially when you're dealing with kids who are in a cycle of generational poverty, it's like there's no quick, easy answer for them to change a whole family trajectory of patterns and situations these kids are in. I think of a local organization that we have here called Pathfinders that works with kids in our, they call them Margaritos, invisible children, kids that live in the motels and things like that in our area. And over the years, when I was youth pastor, I had some of their kids that were in my youth group, and talking to some of the kids who were very used to barricading themselves in their room with their mattresses at night just to stay safe from whatever was on the other side. And just those cycles that kids are in, changing and lifting them out of there, changing their trajectory. It's long and it's slow and it's hard, but it's beautiful when you see it happen, for sure.
So, kind of a segue, and don't let me cut you off. And by the way, I apologize for calling you
You
an
need to ask
atheist.
questions too. That's okay.
I heard that
It's
you
like
had a
it
bunch
seemed
of
like an
questions you
atheist.
didn't ask me last time.
Yeah,
It's the third time's the charm.
we're gonna set back to the task.
No, it's just it's that fine line between going too hard.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, I think it's okay. I think it's okay with you, and I think you prefer that, and I appreciate that. I mean, you made me feel very comfortable last time.
I'm glad to hear it.
I'm sorry, I'm trying not to swear. You're like,
No,
it's
you're
okay.
good.
We can have a conversation, because none of it's, for me, none of it is, being agnostic. I'm not trying to come at you ever like, well, you're stupid for believing that.
Yeah.
For me, I feel like it would be incredibly arrogant and ignorant of me to not believe there's something else, but I have never had that. Like, I was raised, by an atheist, and then my mother was raised Mormon. So it's a very different. It was a very strange upbringing, but we were never raised with any religion, and so, I don't know much about it, and I've also never had that. Yes, this exists. I know there's something. There has to be. Otherwise, there's nothing, and that's not possible. I can't believe that's possible. But a question that I've always had. Sorry, you were going to ask a question.
No, go this route.
How do you feel about the fact that you were raised in the church? You were raised with all of these fairy tales and stories, as I was raised to believe they are. You were raised on reading this book and being told to believe it. So, how do you feel? How do you know that it's not almost like a brainwash?
Sure, yeah. All I've ever known. And
yeah.
Something I think about often, because I have a 5-year-old daughter at home who, her story is similar to mine, that she's being raised in the church, but it's a different dynamic too, because she's being raised as a pastor's daughter. So I think through that often of what that looks like to if I believe what I believe is true, then I want to guide her towards what I believe will be the true source of life in her life, the real, true, honest, authentic source of life and purpose. If I believe that, of course I want to tell my kid that. Yeah. But how do I do that in a way that guides at an appropriate level to ask her questions, to give her freedom to ask me questions and to doubt, navigating that. Like, we'll see down the road as she ages older than 5. Now she surprises me with her insights here and there. Well, and I mean, saying that, you do see people all the time also who were raised in the church and raised that way and become non-believers. Yeah, and for me, I came to a turning point not too long after that trip down to Los Angeles. My mom has been handicapped her whole life. She was born 2 months premature, has cerebral palsy. And nowadays, she has very limited mobility, lots of sensory issues and things like that. She's not able to do very much, but as a child, she could do most things most parents could do up until about middle school. And that's where she couldn't go to church anymore because the lights and the sounds were too center overload for weeks. And so they were still faithful people who told me about Jesus, but it became that make or break of, this is on me now, because if my habits and how I choose to spend my time and where I choose to spend my time, if I'm the decider on this now, it's not put in front of me anymore. And for me, it was also the back and the forth of, while my faith mattered to me, the social circles I ran in, I was the punk rock hardcore kid going to concerts. Like, that was my environment. And that's part why, like, I'm really not offended by any questions you ask, because my friends in that circle, they were very mocking about my faith. So I'm like, oh, this is easy.
And it's that age where it's like you are very influenced by your friends, and it's that time where it's like, if you're going to stray from like the good moral things in life, that's going to be the time. It's like, what's out there to have fun?
Yeah, and
so
growing
that's
up
pretty
in that social circle of the music scene, there wasn't Christian kids in that environment. So we were the targets of a lot of mocking and whatever else. But it put me in the position to realize, kind of going from a borrowed faith to an owned faith. And I think as you're a kid, you really borrow your parents' perspectives on morality, on politics, on the world at large, on spiritual things. You really borrow them, and then there comes a point where you either own it or you depart from it. And for me, I moved to that place realizing, oh, this is true not just because it was told to me, but because this is actually true. And to have that confidence to say, I'm trusting this like I trust the chair I'm sitting on. Like, I trust that it will hold my weight. And that's when my faith transitioned to that point of, I trust that this will hold my weight. Not because it was told to me, because it's actually true.
Yeah, I love that.
Well, and that makes sense, because, I mean, obviously there's a fundamental part of indoctrination in the whole range of belief systems, from mores, morals, ethics, to Christianity versus Buddha. But you have Buddhists who were raised Buddhists who are now Christians, and you have Christians who are raised Christians who are now Shintoists. So obviously at some point there becomes a place for some people, not necessarily everyone, but I think for most people, where it's either Santa Claus, Christ doesn't work anymore, or I'm going to bury my head in my sand. It becomes totally cultural and not a living religion at all.
And I think there's the struggle of accepting something beyond cherry picking elements of it that you find endearing.
Well, that's where I want to segue. So, being a spiritual leader, that's such a nebulous term, because we have watered it down per ad nauseum, because we want to, because it's easier that way. So talk to me about spirituality versus religiosity. Everybody, I shouldn't say everyone, I'm overgeneralizing, but it's like the caveat today is, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, kind of as a virtual signaling, I'm better than religion, you religious people, I'm spiritual. What's the difference? What is it? What is it?
And I'd say in large part the door's swinging both ways now, where you have people that say I'm spiritual but I'm not religious, as well as people that are saying I'm religious but I'm not spiritual.
Right.
And especially ironically with like millennial guys right now. And it's an interesting thing where it can go both ways of like, well, I like an institution, but I don't actually practice a faith. And you have guys like Dawkins saying that he's a cultural Christian. Now, that would be that, saying, well, I'm religious, but I'm not spiritual. But for people that say, I'm spiritual but not religious, and what that looks like for me as a spiritual leader, so, to use your words, I think it's having the conversations with people that are farther, to stretch them just a little bit farther than they want to go, just a little bit, and the way that takes the time to care, to hear their stories, to talk to them about their questions, to talk with them about, oftentimes there's some element of a wound there for most people, and in our area that's a big part of it, is whether that looks like people that were raised, tons of friends were raised out in Elko that were raised LDS, or you've got people that were raised in churches that they were hurt by churches. There's some piece
of the term the recovering Catholic.
There's something there for people that oftentimes there's the level of, you might have intellectual thoughts, but what's the wound that might be the real thing?
And that's the pathway.
And to have those conversations with people to help guide them a little bit farther ahead, to see something beyond what they might see. It's sometimes in themselves. Like when I think of Carol, who invited me on that trip, she saw something in me that I didn't see. And she led in the sense of saying, I see this in you and I'm speaking it out, I'm challenging you, and she sought me out to have that conversation. And that's the position that I'm in all the time, is to seek people out to have that next conversation, or to maybe say, hey, go to Iraq with me, something. That's what I do.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you find value in this content, please like, subscribe, and let us know any other topics you want us to talk about in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, the first wedding I ever did.
How bad the day was.
It was one of the students, a kid who I've known most of his life, and he's like, hey, so I want to just turn 21. He's like, I want to take you out for a beer. I'm like, sounds good. Hang out. He's like, well, I wanted to get a beer with you because, well, I'm engaged, and I'm engaged because she's pregnant. Will you do our wedding? Oh, she's an atheist. And I was like, yes, I will. We'll figure this out together.
Okay, I love that.
And it was funny because talking with her, she was had a lot of church hurt, and she's like, well, a lot of anger towards God. I'm like, if you're mad at God, that means you know that he's real. And she's like, well, I guess I'm not an atheist then. And it was like that. She had never thought of it that way of like, I'm like, if he's not real, you don't really care.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
How do you answer that? So I think a lot of people's problem with the church is what you just touched on. There have been wars over religion, many wars over religion. There are tons of molestation cases, things that have hit the news all over the map. How do you rectify that? How do you tell someone who is trying to looks at you and says, well, how can this be a good thing when these things are happening? Tell me how the church is good if these terrible things are happening.
Yeah, I think it's hard to wind back history and look at those specific conflicts and why they happened. Were they prescribed by people that were religious? Was it an outpouring of their faith?
Mm-hmm.
Or was it people that there was a cultural element of their faith and their belief system that happened adjacent to it? You look at situations like the Crusades.
Mm-hmm.
Did that happen because of people's faith or because they felt dishonored, and that had more to do with the culture of a bunch of knights with nothing to do, so they went off to war?
Yeah.
And more about honor. Well, that doesn't have to do with their faith.
Mm-hmm.
They might have looked like that. They might have fleshed out that way, but it was not
I
prescribed.
liken it to the 2A movement and the Christian movement. There's this kind of this commingling of, okay, you're 2A, so you're a Christian, so you have to be 2A. But I have a lot of friends who are Christians who are not 2A. They're not Second Amendment contenders, and then you have a group that are. And so that commingling of the two, now you've got this whole group of outside spectators going, oh, so to be a Christian you have to have an AR-15 and be ready to gun people down.
Yep.
And it's like, well, no, I read the Bible a couple times and I haven't found that particular passage, but I think it gets conflated that way. And I think it's an oversimplification to say, oh, well, all that has been a conflation. It's been a commingling, but I also think that when you look at the heart of it, if they're looking at biblical statutes and their actions are completely 180 degrees, that wasn't a Christian movement.
Yeah.
But then, of course, people are like, well, but who are you to get to decide?
Yeah.
Well, and I
what's
would liken
Christian
it
and not?
to, I agree with you, and I think that you could make the argument that it's, again, good and evil at play. And the evil being used at that is the non-believers, and they're using religion as that excuse. But that's not actually the religion itself. That's not actually God himself or the church itself. That's the evil coming into play. And something, that's that big and that important, it's worth fighting for.
Yeah.
So there's the good at play as well. It's like, we're going to fight for this that means the world to us.
Yeah.
So.
And it's interesting when I had the impression when we were in the Middle East together a couple of years ago that people's perception of, well, if America's a Christian nation, look how bad they are, and they look at everything they see play out in Hollywood and politics.
Right.
And we look from inside and go, there's not a connection there.
Yeah.
And it's easy to look at an entire group to paint with a broad brush and to say this group is bad and they do these things because of their belief system.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody can be a nominal Christian, a Christian in name only, if there's not actual faith practice that looks anything like the ethics that Jesus shows for us.
Mm-hmm.
There's a large movement right now of people that say, oh, I'm an evangelical Christian. And it's like, well, do you believe that Jesus was real? No. I'm like, well, then by definition, you're not a Christian. Like, those two don't connect. And so and that looks like not just within the spectrum of somebody that's a Christian, but it's easy to look at a large group of people and to say this is how they all are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Again, people love bad news.
Mhm.
So it's like,
Sure.
you know, if there are those few
Oh,
bad
100%,
seeds,
yeah.
those are going to be focused on. I could see that.
And mobs do horrible things. Nobody ever does anything good in a large group that gets fired up about something, especially if they feel like they have an enemy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Woodstock 99, baby.
I-
Example.
Yeah, I remember years ago when you and
I mean, it's true, mom mentality. That's
I remember
crazy.
a bunch of my punk rock friends trying to cause trouble when there was that big Boise State UNR game years
Oh,
ago.
yeah.
And friends that were trying to start a riot just because they wanted to. And people in groups do stupid
Yeah.
things. And
Group man mentality.
Yeah.
but it takes a lot of courage to stand out of a group that you feel like you're in to say, this went off the rails here. I'm not with you anymore. And that's
Takes a lot
and
of courage.
it takes a lot to stand out and to say, oh, well, I'm not like one of those people that you all love to mock. You departed from where I'm not going with you any further down this.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
you look at inflection points throughout history where large groups of people did horrible, evil, violent things. Along the way, there were people that had to choose if they were still down with it or if they were going to depart.
Yeah.
And that might have looked like early on when things were more innocent or way downfield.
Yeah.
But to stand out from a crowd, it takes a lot of courage, especially if it's your cost.
crowd.
Especially if it's your
Yeah.
crowd, for sure. And I
Yeah.
see that in our climate often being a spiritual leader where people assume that you agree with them about their views on a political figure, political parties, issues, to say, oh, well, you agree with me, right? And to find that line to tell people, not on this.
Yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
you might be disappointed, but I'm not going as far as you do about
Yeah.
X, Y, or Z.
Yeah. This is not where I stand.
That's the hard side of leadership from within a group.
It's hard.
And it's kind of cool being in the room with the both of you, because obviously you do that, but it's also really cool because that's something that you do on a regular basis, and I'm kind of in this practice room of, because I really just kind of keep my head down and just do my own thing and don't really make it very many sense, but I've watched you do it, and then I'm like, okay, well, she's doing it, I got to do it too.
Well, I would say, like, there's going back to how I was raised, like, it was, like I said, it was fairy tales and it's kind of made fun of by
Yep.
some people that I was around. But one thing I really like and what shifted my mentality, I'm not saying I'm a believer, but but
Just for
meeting
the record.
JP, I really, really liked and respected. Not that everyone comes to their faith in different ways, right? If you get there. He got there the way that makes sense in my brain. In that he was trying to like disprove it almost, right? Like he got there
Didn't work
through.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he said you were pretty angry about it. Like
I was
he
pretty
was,
mad about
but
it.
he did
Yeah.
so much research and and that's the way my brain works. It's like you have to prove it to me. And it can be proved in different ways, right? But him saying that and having so much respect for him, kind of shifted my view. It's like, okay, if someone is intelligent and someone I respect as much as JP got there through that avenue, I like that. That makes sense in my head. So what would you say to people who are maybe hesitant because they have never been in the atmosphere, but they're curious, right? But going into the church is it's
Intimidating.
scary. It's
Yeah.
intimidating for people who've never
All
been
the
there.
singing,
Yeah.
and being
Yeah.
huggy
Like,
and
so,
friendly.
yeah,
And,
happy.
I remember my wife was raised Catholic,
Okay.
and a couple years after we got married was the first time I went to mass with her family, and I told her, I'm paranoid, I don't want to offend your parents, I don't know what to do. I was raised in the church, but very different
It's
setting in
fun.
the Catholic Church. Like I don't know when I'm supposed to do what or say what. I just don't want to offend your parents.
Yeah.
And we got there, and she's like, you'll figure it out, it's fine. Kind of just let me figure it out. But for me, it was similar. It's like, this is not a space that, it's different than I'm used
Yeah.
to. I don't want to do the wrong thing. There's an intimidation side,
Mhm.
as well as walking in and also not feeling like, I feel like a fraud. You know, I hear it all the time for people. It's just part of the vocational hazard. If people make a comment like, well, I'm afraid the walls are going to fall in when I walk in the door. But I think it's start with conversations with somebody to ask questions. The goal is to have a reasonable faith. And I think at the end of the day, when I look at what I want for my daughter, I want her to move from a faith that I've talked with her about to owning it and to asking the questions and to know that this is her environment with me and a relationship with me is one where she can ask any question that I'm never going to say, but not that one.
I believe that. Yeah, that's
And
amazing.
I think for many families that might be raising their kids in a faith system, there can be a defensiveness,
Mhm.
and sometimes that can look like the embarrassment factor that parents just got to deal with of like, their peers and their friends, and they're wanting to look like they've got it all together. But to know that there's never a conversation that I don't want to have with my daughter. It doesn't matter what question she has or anything. I never want her to feel like I have to act like this doesn't bother me because I don't want my parents to be upset or disappointed.
Yeah, that's really cool.
But that reasonable side, I want it to make sense to her.
Well, I love I like your I love that typecasting, a reasonable faith, because really I think there's this misnomer that faith is like this. You close your eyes and just blindly believe, and that's actually not faith at all. Like there's a distinction between blind faith, which is actually not reasonable at all, and faith, because real faith has evidential support, but it can't get you all the way there. You still have to take a leap. Blind faith is, well, I just want to believe there's aliens in Santa Fe. And I don't have a shred of evidence, but they're there. There actually might be aliens. I haven't kept up with it. But if you have no evidence whatsoever, that's not faith at all. That's this blind faith. And I think sometimes we use those things interchangeably, and then it gives us a bad name, or it gives you a bad name, or it makes it harder because it's like, oh, fairy tales and so forth.
Yeah.
But then there's actually this substantiated evidence, and then the leap is after there's a platform of evidence, whether that's experiential or intellectual.
Yeah, there has to be some transition point where there's the spark for somebody of, this is not just an intellectual assent that these ideas make sense to me, but like, I'm going to do something about this. There's a connection from a head to a heart that happens at some point.
That's the part that made me really angry.
I could see that.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. I mean, that's the faith, right? Like, I love that you're saying like, not blind faith, but you can see the evidence, you can read the books, you can see these things, and then at some point there's evidence that you can't read, and there's evidence that you can't see, and that's faith.
Yep.
It's like, that's still evidence, even if it's not in a book.
Yep. And I think that the struggle naturally comes of when you've digested the evidence, and you might be convinced, but to make that journey down from your head to your heart and realize this is clicking, if there's any kind of hurt from faithful people in any context, that's usually that next barrier there of, I've got to sort through a wound, or there's the, I don't want to be associated with those people. I might not be, I haven't been hurt by them, but I don't want to be in that group.
Yeah.
I don't want to be associated with them.
Yeah.
I don't want to be like, and there's that crust then of, that's not necessarily an intellectual battle. There's a level of, like, I need God to be big enough in my life for me to submit to His authority.
Yep.
And if
He's
I
gotta be
really,
big.
He's got to be big, and He's got to tell me what to do. Like, and I think as an American, that's the hardest thing for us, is because we don't want to submit to
Yeah.
control.
Independence.
And
Yeah.
there's things about my faith that are hard for me, that demand something of me, that demand sacrifice, that there's things that aren't easy, and if I cherry pick around those things, then it's not real. So I have to accept who the person of Jesus is, and He gets to tell me how He is.
Yeah, well, before we segue, because I want to jump into Iraq, your vacation spot.
Yeah.
But,
Go
couple
to your
weeks away.
vacation
It'll
spot.
be great.
The only people on the planet I know who are like, yeah, we get to go on vacation finally. I'm like, where? Iraq.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah, just the other day I was getting
No,
ready
it's
for
so
work,
cool.
and my mother-in-law was hanging out with my daughter, and I hear her say, "Yeah, Grandma, I'm going to save my money and go to Disney World, and then I want to go to Iraq with Dad one day." And my mother-in-law looked at me, panicked, and I'm like, "Worry about it. She's not going."
Not today.
Yeah, she had a decent poker face, but that would freak Grandma out a little bit.
Yeah,
That's pretty cool, though.
It was
At
cool.
the same time.
It was.
It is.
She
That's
told me that
amazing.
she's saving money in her piggy bank for me to take to people in Iraq because she knows they don't have a lot of money.
That's so great.
That
They
is
were
so
proud.
sweet.
So before we segue into Iraq, though, you said a phrase which I like, and it's kind of on the cusp of what we're talking about. You said that I can't remember exactly, but you said Jesus is offensive, and you need a Jesus that's offensive.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of
Yeah.
paraphrasing. Tell me about that part.
I think at the end of the day, I have a relationship with my wife. I don't get to define who she is. I have a relationship with who she is. I can have ideas about who Jesus is, but if Jesus is real and alive, He gets to tell me who He is. I don't get to make Him how I want Him to be.
You can't just.
And that's where that offensive part is of, it's easy to have an intellectual assent to an idea of something or a faith system, But if Jesus is real and alive, he gets to call the shots.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't get to make him in my image as I want it to be. I don't get to have social warrior Jesus or
American
Republican
Jesus.
Jesus or American Jesus. Those are all pieces, but it's not a person.
Yeah.
And that's that offensive part of, in any relationship with a real person, there are dynamics with them of discovering who they are, of realizing that you might do and say things that are offensive or cause hurt to that person that you have to make amends for and own. There's change that happens in a relationship because it's with a person.
Yeah.
And when you're dealing with the perfect person of Jesus, thankfully there's a lot of trust there. Trustworthiness may be the better way to put it, but he gets to tell me who he is and what I need to do about it.
Yeah, that's a constant revelation because we want to put him in a box. It's kind of like, I had this happen actually last week. One of my friends was telling me about, so one of my friends had a friend who was telling me about their friend. Well, we get about 10 minutes into it. They're talking about me.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't realize at first, and that person didn't realize, and my friend thought it was hilarious. So he's telling me about this friend that the friend was telling him about, and he's like telling him this and that, and about 40% of it was true, and about 60% I was like, I like me a lot more than I do.
Yeah.
Cool.
Like, I need to meet this
I
man.
think that's sometimes Jesus only in the reverse. Like we try to funnel him into like, I need him to be like this because I'm going to do this, and I don't want him to tell me otherwise.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Like, I love that because then there's no slippery slope.
Mm.
It's like you don't get to pick and choose
Yeah.
what he is today to suit your needs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I like that.
Which is why I was so offended when I finally had to argue.
Yeah.
I think that might be real.
It's like anything that are the best things in life. Like, I can relate to that with, just work and relationships and stuff. You don't get to pick and choose depending on what you want to do that day. The biggest, best things in life hold you accountable every single day in every single way. And that's
The offense of
yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get that. You should be offensive. I like
Pretty
that.
spiritual for us.
Yeah, look at me.
There you go.
Okay,
And
so
I tell people all the time, like, there's the side of it of Jesus offends me in good ways that produce good in my life,
Mhm.
and it hinges on, do I feel like I can trust him? Like, the prayer I pray with my daughter every night is, Jesus, thank you that you're the same today that you were yesterday, and you're going to be the same tomorrow.
Yeah.
There's not the change there. There's the consistency that produces trust in me. And if I really believe all this, my job is to be the least offendable person in any room.
Yeah.
And that comes back to that defensive posture, or shutting down questions, not being comfortable with people expressing any doubts or even outright hostilities.
Yeah.
If I really believe it, I should be the least offendable person.
Mhm.
Like, I don't have anything to be offended by.
Yeah.
You said something before when we were talking about like what it is to be a spiritual leader, and I think you said one of the biggest things was that you don't want to be anyone's wound.
Yeah, when we were talking, we
Yeah.
recorded before, yeah.
Yeah, is
Times
that?
ago.
Can you talk about that a little
That's
bit?
one of the things that is most humbling about the position I'm in, because it might look like a conversation at passing on a Sunday when I'm running from here to here to take care of things that have to happen at the church. During church service time, it can look like when I don't recognize old students for being a youth pastor because they're not 12 anymore at a grocery store. And like, I've had those moments where I can tell the kid bagging my groceries is like, oh, hey, Nathan. And I'm like, they're old enough to be one of my old students. I cannot remember this kid's name.
Everything just changed so much. Yeah.
And those things where I realize I have the potential to cause somebody a wound, intentionally, unintentionally, just by life happening.
Mhm.
And I don't want to be anybody's wound. I don't want for somebody to not to see and be disappointed. And that's that hard tension point of like, I'm a human being.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And what does that look like for? I don't want to be my wife's wound, my daughter's wound, people I come in contact with at the church.
Mhm.
I don't want to say something. I had a reminder just this week of somebody seen at the church often and hearing more of their story, realizing there's so much more to this person's story than I was aware of.
Right.
What are the times where I can unintentionally say something that hits a pain point for somebody in a way that's not helpful? And just carrying that as a spiritual leader is very hard, because you get trusted with the deepest parts of people often.
Mhm.
And just to tread on holy ground,
Yeah.
like realizing that if you're invited into people's lives, that's something to be taken
It's a
seriously.
huge responsibility.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I saw when when I got the call to be a pastor at 19, and I was scared out of my mind.
I've been too.
Yeah, talk about intimidating.
Yeah, and there were situations where some of my volunteer teams were some of my best friends and lifelong best friends, and figuring out how to handle issues when they would screw up and things like that. Like, it changed a lot of those formative years of my life because I just had a different filter than my peers did.
Sure.
And what I did is I reached out to my buddy Clarence, who's Clarence is in his 70s, African American Baptist pastor, and I'm like, hey Clarence, I am gonna die on the vine here. I could blow my life up.
Right.
Help me not blow my life up.
Yeah.
And him and I had lunch once a month for 10 years, just giving me some wisdom and being a sounding board for me,
Yeah.
because I didn't want to implode at 19 trying to figure it out.
Sure.
Oh man.
All right, so let's,
No, I just think that's so amazing. Like, just having a mentor like that is so helpful.
We definitely
Like, I
got
had
funny looks from both of our friends when we'd be at restaurants, because you could see people try to understand why this like 6.5 foot tall African American, like 70-year-old Baptist pastor is sitting down with me, and we're obviously friends and know
You're
each other
19.
well. People are looking at us like, I can't make sense of this.
that's a pretty.
That's cool. That's cool.
So yeah, let's talk about your vacation spot, Suleimani.
Yep,
Oh yeah.
2 weeks away. Less than 2 weeks now.
All right, so why Iraq? I mean, there's a lot of places to go. Like, honestly, when people first brought up the idea of mission trips, I didn't know that was a thing. I was like, Hawaii sounds good.
Yeah.
Talk to me about Iraq.
Yeah, so Iraq came on my radar through missions connections in Chile. So one of my roles when I was at the previous church I was at was over missions, and had a connection point with an organization there, and we had inherited from long since past, lost contact and information with them, and we're like, we don't know what they're doing. We don't know who these people are. Let's just stop sending them money, and we'll see if we hear anything. And they reached out to us, and they were like, oh yeah, this is what we did to be in contact. Here's all the information. Here's what we're doing. Oh, did you know that we're working in Iraq? And we're like, we had no idea you were working. We thought you were in Chile.
Yeah.
Why are you in Iraq? And so it started this story of understanding what they felt called to do. They've been working in Chile for decades. And second Gulf War, they said, well, if troops are going into Iraq, we should take these Chilean Christians that we worked with for 30 years and let's take them to Iraq. And so they started ministry there, doing corkscrew landing over Baghdad airport and rocket fire. They were there the early days of the second Gulf War and just fell in love with the Kurds, specifically up in the northern end of Iraq. And through an invitation with them, they said, hey, can you come be a part? Can you come and see? And they reached out to us and they said, hey, as a church, our church sets aside money. We set aside 5% of our offering for a church plant fund to help local churches around the world, to help give them resources. And we had money built up, and they said, we have an opportunity with the Iraqi government to have the first newly issued license to a Christian church they've issued in over 30 years, and we just need help and funds. Can you help? And we said, yes, we can.
That's crazy. How cool.
And then they said, okay, now can you come visit? And so it started the journey of figuring out the what, the when. And
I'd love to see that conversation with your wife.
it went about like you'd expect at first, yeah.
Come again?
Yeah.
Let me explain.
I don't know what conversation was funnier, like the conversation with her or then when we told my parents. And then it was, oh yeah, and my sister's coming too. And then it was like,
that's
your
right.
sister's coming?
That's right.
Yeah. So that one was a little more entertaining
Oh
even.
my gosh.
And so my sister and I in particular, and a couple other friends like Sean who was with us, were starting the process to try to go over and accept their invitation to come and see back in 2019 and 2020, and then the world fell apart.
Oh yeah.
International travel got put on hold until
Yep.
felt it was safe to travel again, and tapped JP on the shoulder and said, hey, can you come with me? Like, I'm not putting out why to people. It's different to say, oh, I've heard it's safe versus I've been in it safe.
Yeah.
But can you come be a guinea pig?
Mm-hmm.
It's a fun guinea pig. Was there any point where you're like, you second thought it, had some reservations?
Yeah, so I definitely was intimidated at first, but I kept having conversations with people I trusted that were like, no, trust me, I've been in it safe, and kept talking to me about how hospitable and welcoming the Kurds are, and
Yeah.
our perceptions in the West are so hard because that part of the world is so vast, but it's so small at the same time,
Yeah.
and just our perspectives on distance for things are kind of complicated.
4 hours south to Baghdad, it's a totally different world.
Night and day different world.
Yeah.
And so there's definitely working through that. There was some fear and apprehension there, but at the same time, people I trust were like, oh no, trust me, this is safe. So
So sophomore round, going back, A, what is your biggest anticipation? Like, you're really excited about having been once before, and second of all, like, what do you now know that like you had no idea that first go around?
Yeah. The travel is brutal. That's the part that looking at our itinerary and all that.
Like the
It's
flight,
just
or once
brutal.
you get there?
Oh, it's just a
getting to-
long travel. That
Okay.
is, it's 30+ hours.
Oh my gosh.
And
that's a lot.
it's brutal. And I remember when we got home last time, Gabby told me how long you fell asleep for when you got home. She's like, I've never seen him do that before.
I like
I think
this.
it's like
You're
the
actually
only time
gonna...
in my entire life.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Gabby's okay with this because she's like, all right, we'll come home.
It's
and
once a
sleep."
year.
30 hours.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so that part is the part that looking at everything is the, okay, it takes a long time to get over there, and it's just a brutal travel times. But I'm excited to go back in the sense of, could see quite clearly in so many conversations with friends we made over there that the Kurds so deeply want to be known. And so many people are on an island, they don't have freedom to travel like we do.
Mhm.
And so it means the world that people come. And that people
Someone
come
actually
back.
cares.
And to realize that you have support from around the world. You're not alone. And the conversations that would happen over tea or at restaurants, people were so quickly like, what do you know about the Kurds? And they would often say, we're not like those, not like these people or those people. Like, there's just a desire to be known because they're the largest people group in the world without land and their own governments, and that they are their own people that have been forgotten about when it comes to international relationships.
Yeah.
And they're beautiful, hospitable people that just want to be known. And so to go back and see friends is what I'm most excited for.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. So, I mean, this is kind of the cliche, but I'm gonna throw it out there anyway. So, what'd you learn?
Over there in general?
Or even in retrospect.
Yeah.
I imagine you came back and I couldn't see the world the same.
Mm.
I mean, by now, some of that has shifted, but even now,
Yeah.
there's things that I came back and it's like, there's a hurt now where there wasn't one before because I didn't notice.
Yep. For me, I love the opportunity to tell people a better story. And I think of conversations that I have all to this day when people are like, why are you going?
Yeah.
And to talk with them about the courageous men and women that we became friends with and who have stayed and stay because that's home. And when people are inspired by hope, it's one of my favorite things to watch people light up, because people hear so many discouraging things about the world, and people have so much fear, or they have so much, there's those people have been our enemies. There's just, when you're out of that and you see the way, especially through the filter of my faith, that God is doing a lot more in his world than I might see and that people might know, and to be a good storyteller, because people hear the bad stories.
Oh, yeah.
But to hear, this is what is actually happening beyond the headline, that's just designed to get you more angry or more afraid.
Mm-hmm.
But to see that light up in people, to tell people stories, and to help people that they might be a dentist in Kurdistan who's just trying to be faithful, but they have a story that's worth telling,
Mm-hmm.
and the way
Especially
that
if they're
inspires
dentist
people.
/ doctor.
Yeah, right.
But guy was just like, you're gonna be both.
Just
like, cool.
Doing all the things.
Yeah.
Yep. But to me, that responsibility there, I learned that responsibility and that opportunity. I remember hanging out with a friend shortly after we got back and just talking about what's going on over there, and he's like, you haven't even asked me for any money, but can I give you money? Like, what do they need? And I was like, well, I'm not. You asked me about who I met and what I did, and I'm telling you the story.
Well, you inspired him that quickly.
And he's like, yeah, exactly. He's like, is there an ask coming? Because I hope you're going to ask me to help
At this point,
some
I'm
way.
prepped.
And I'm like, I'm having whiskey with a friend. That was my motivation. I'm answering your questions about what I did with whiskey with a friend.
But I get it, what you just said, because you talking about that just now, like, I felt it.
Yeah.
Like, that's incredible. And you're so right. Like, all you hear is the bad. All you hear is the bad. It's
There's
all
so
these
much
clouds.
beauty.
And, like, for you to, like, get to spread that light and hope is just incredible.
It was cool. My wife and I were having a conversation the other night about what missions and these things will look like what philanthropy work will look like with my daughter as she ages, because it's so integral to my story. And it's been so shaping to me and how I view the world and people, and what that looks like for her will be its own thing. But to have those dialogues with her now, you know, when we were getting ready to leave 2 years ago, like get my backpack early in the morning to go to the airport, and she slipped her favorite stickers in a coloring page in my backpack to
So cute.
and we have has new sponsor kid over there now that we help with their education. We had a previous one who I got to meet, and the first thing she's like, "Did you give my stickers to Aya?" And the ways that to include her to have a bigger view of the world and what that looks like.
I love that, because then it doesn't feel like Daddy's leaving because he wants to help people instead of us. It's like Daddy's leaving because he's so big-hearted. He wants to help these people with us.
Yeah.
And to include us.
It's
So cool.
partnership as a thing.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
I like that. You must be called, I would imagine. I mean, every single day, obviously, in our community, you're being called to help. And I would imagine that on top of that, just your strong belief, your strong spirituality and all of that, there are so many people everywhere who need you, who need help, who need hope. So why the Kurds? And I know you've given me kind of your why, but how do you pick and choose? Because it's you really can't help everybody, tangibly you can't. You can in certain ways, right? But you can't be everywhere. You can't help every single person on the planet. So how do you choose, and how does that, I mean, I am not a spiritual person. I'm not a believer, and it eats me alive. So it's how do you deal with that? Because everyone wants you, everyone wants that help. So
It's a really hard thing to hold in tension, areas that you're called to and ones that you're not.
Okay.
And there are things that I'm not called to do. And there's but a lot of my job and what it looks like to be a spiritual leader is to maybe find the person that is their job.
Yeah.
And it's not my job to meet every need, but
someone else will have that call.
to cast a vision, to paint a picture for people, and to see something in people, to include them so that they can be a part of that. And maybe they might be the right person to care for that. And I think especially with people that care deeply and have a heart for the people in the world around them, it can be a thing of oftentimes people are like, well, I want you to care for this issue the way I do. And if you don't, then you're just hard-hearted. And I see the way that plays out so much on the large scale with the culture of people shouting down at people that don't care for whatever issue they do. And I'm like, you're not going to convince anybody.
Yeah.
Not that way.
Yeah.
If something changes you, great. Tell that story to people. It'd be okay to connect other people with other areas that they can serve, that they can care. Because at the end of the day, I don't want to create a bunch of pastors. I want people to be faithful realtors. I want people to be faithful policemen, people that are in healthcare, wherever people are, to what that looks like for them to see their world differently and the people they come in contact with to be changed.
Yeah.
Because that's my job, is to help people learn and to grow what that looks like to care for the world around them, to see the people in their circles and their vicinity that cross their paths just like Jesus does. And for me, that's my job.
Spreading the word, there's the ripple.
Yeah, and that's where it's those individual interactions with people
I think too,
changes.
there's this thin line in between, because I think if you shoulder too much of, here's a person, here's this group of people with needs and wants and hurts and so forth, but if you shoulder all that, then now the emphasis is on you. It becomes pretty egocentric, pretty inflationary of your ego. And then if you go, oh, well, God's got it, then that's obtuse, and now you're on the other end of the spectrum, because really 99.9% of God's miracles are at the hands of somebody.
Yeah.
That's how that works. So it's that thin line between. It's probably 10 times harder for you because that's your job.
Yep.
But it's actually all of our jobs.
Yeah.
You're just very focused in your job.
Yeah. It is hard because there's things that you have to say no to.
Yeah.
And figuring out when it can depart between I'm doing something to try to soothe my own wound because we carry them, and or to satisfy my own ego, or to like to be in the limelight, to like to be thought of as somebody that's X, Y, or Z. Those are those areas where we can depart from what we're doing and the why we're doing it, and it kind of can be a little bit of a shadow mission of the thing that's actually driving us. And to, like that, we're humans, so we hold all of that, and there's different percentage of it that rears up on the different day depending on how we're doing. Of, are we more comfortable making our family pay the price than the stranger? And it's that the most loving thing to do, or is that actually not the most loving thing to share? And what those things look like. It's not easy to get right, and I think it requires a lot of humility for people when you look at somebody that might be doing it differently than you think they should, and to realize like maybe they're not a jerk or a villain, maybe they're just trying to do the best they can today.
Awesome. Thank you so
Thanks
much
for having me back.
again.
Hey, third time's a charm.
There you go.
So should we introduce probably? So what is your,
And realizing kept getting put in people's paths.
I'm gonna grab a water for you.
sorry.
You're good.
Real as